Right. What we are going to do now? So far, the exception, whenever any exception has generated, internal Java runtime environment handles the exception. Now, after handling the exception, the Java runtime environment sent some error code, 500 internal server error code to the postman. So the postman displayed this kind of a message. This is a predefined message. Instead of that predefined message, I want to display some custom message. Okay, custom error message. Let us first define that custom error message. After custom error message, we'll define our own handler, exception handler. Okay, so the custom error message or custom error response, that is called. So what do we do here? Let us stop the server, go to the exception package. Here, new class, let us define. This class name can be error response, means during the exception what is to be sent to the client. Yeah, this is a simple bean, very simple bean. Okay, after defining this, few more we need to modify in the REST controller. Instead of returning business objects, we need to send a response entity. What do we need to return? Response entities we need to return. That is actually a best practice. Response entity instead of returning the business entity. Yeah, that will do. Here, the error response class should have few member data. They are date, java.util.date, on which date and time the exception has generated, and then some int, that is response, HTTP response code, and then one string. This string can be the HTTP response status, and finally another variable string message. Okay, for these variables, let us fix the appropriate constructors, setters, getters, etc. Okay, so first let us define constructor from superclass. Right. So here, as of now, the constructor is not doing anything. Instead of that, what do? The data, every member is null by default, but date should not be null. On which date and time the exception has generated, that we need to present. So this dot date equals to new data. That is all. Okay, so this is simply no arg constructor, and then all arg, not all but few args. Constructor using fields. So what all fields I am going to use? Yeah, actually this is nothing. Actually we are not going to use any of them. So public error response. The arguments are something like HTTP status, HTTP status, that is status, and then string any message you have. Right. The HTTP status object have so many other things. First, let us call the super constructor. The HTTP status will have status code and status message. First, let us instantiate date. Date equals to new data. Right. And then we have code and status. So this dot code equals to HTTP status dot value method is there, which will return the status code. And then this dot status, that is a string. This dot status is the status, HTTP status argument dot name. So you get the HTTP status message, and then finally this dot message is argument message. That is all. Once this is done, the remaining just setters, getters, finished. This is error response. Earlier some different kind of error response appeared. Here onwards this error response is going to be presented to the client. Okay, Right. What I told before, we are going to handle the exception. Custom exception handler. Before we are going to define the custom exception handler. JVM handler handled earlier. Now instead of JVM handler, we are going to provide a handler, exception handler. Before that, the controller earlier returned all the business objects. Instead of returning business objects, response entity is recommended to return. What do we need to return? Response entity. So this response entity will be wrapped over the business entity. Response message is there, right? What is presenting to the client? That is actually response entity class. So the response entity is to be instantiated, is to be wrapped over the business entity. Direct business entity sending is not a good practice. So here, list of person. No, it is not actually list of persons. It is response entity wrapped over list of persons. Now, correspondingly here, what you need to return here? New response entity. This response entity object encapsulates couple of things: the entity to be presented to the client and what is the HTTP status code. Here, see here, this is the body, what is to be presented to the client, and HTTP status code also. Okay, right, appropriate status codes we will send every time. Persons, and then what is the HTTP status we will use? HTTP status dot OK. That is the response entity we are returning for find all methods. Find method, not methods. Now here find by ID. This is also not a person to be returned. Instead of person, response entity of the response entity should be wrapped over a person. Now here also new response entity, the body is the person service find by all ID, and then here the status HTTP status OK. Now save. Yeah, here also returning person, response entity wrapped over person. So return type also we should modify here, return value also we should modify. New response entity, body. What is the body? The body is saved return value. After saving whatever return value you received, that is the body. And then HTTP status. Here created something is there. Yeah, created. Okay, so for different operation, different HTTP status codes. Now here again for this one also response entity over a person. Now new response entity, the body is the returned object of edit operation, and then HTTP status. I don't know whether updated is there or not. Updated is not there. So edited, no, edit also not there. So what do we do? OK only we do. Otherwise we can do accepted. Whatever person object we have sent, that's been accepted. And then here the return type person to response entity over a person object, and then let us return new response entity over the returned object of a person ID, person by ID, and then HTTP status OK. Done everything. Done. Response entity. Yeah. This is something wrong. Response entity over a person. So this should be person. Right. Yeah. Actually, I am searching. What is the error? Right. Done everything. Now the final step is custom exception handler. Instead of JRE handling the exception or custom exception handler is going to handle the exception. So for that, I'm going to define another class in my exception package. Where is my exception? Yeah, in exception package, new class. What is that? Custom exception handler. The class name also custom exception handler. Right. Now let us define few methods here. The method name can be public void method 1. Okay, then public void method 2. Finish. Not a problem. The method name can be anything, but this class should be annotated with @controller advice. What is the method to be annotated? Class to be annotated? Controller advice. Okay, and then these two methods, method 1 and method 2, are to be annotated with the @exception handler. Excuse me, someone is seriously trying. Yeah, so here these two methods are to be annotated with what is the purpose of those methods. Exception handler, custom exception handler is the class. What is the job of the methods? Handle the exception. So exception handler, what kind of exception it is going to handle? Yeah, value is, what is the exception name it is going to handle? What is our exception name? Did you remember? Invalid person ID exception dot class. Automatically system is supporting us a lot. Half the code I am typing, not half, even few characters I am typing, the rest of the code my STS is giving. Okay, so sweet STS. Right, now the method. What's this method will take one argument. What is the exception that this method is going to take as argument? Invalid person ID exception, that is the same invalid person ID. Oh, ID exception, small. Fine. Right. Now what to do? Let us create one HTTP status object. HTTP status equal to HTTP status dot not found. Not found. What is the HTTP status I want to send to the client? Not found. And then the string message. What is the message I want to send to the client? Here the exception object, ID exception object is there, right? Every exception object will encapsulate some string message inside of it. That message, that string, let us take. So ID exception dot get message. So here every time we are displaying on the console, did you remember? See, this is person ID not found, that ID. So this is the message, okay, string messages. And the other one is error response object. Sometime back we have created error response, custom error response, that object, error response equal to new error response of HTTP status, that status object we have created sometime back, and the message just immediate previous line. That's all. Now let us return this exception. Return. Okay, here I have mentioned what is the return type? Void, right? So that it will not allow to write us at a time. So we'll do one new. This exception object is to be sent to the client. So response entity, new response entity. What is the body here? Body is the that is error response, and the status. Anyways, the status variable is there, HTTP status, that is. Now let us return this response entity object instead of void. So response entity over error response. Error response is to be delivered to the client. So return this. So whenever any invalid person ID exception has thrown, JRE is not going to handle, or custom exception handler, this particular method is going to handle. In the similar way, okay, is this the only exception to be thrown throughout the application? No, maybe some other exception also. So if any other exception than invalid person ID exception, then this other method is going to handle. Yeah, here we will copy almost everything. Okay, the method name let us change. The previous method is ready to handle the invalid person ID exception, but this method is any other exception. Any other exception. So java.lang.exception. Okay, now the exception object name also let us change to appropriate exception. Here also let us change to appropriate exception. Finished everything. This is a project as done. Now let us stop. Yeah, already stopped. Now let us relaunch. Now once after relaunch, successfully relaunched, we'll open the Postman. Yeah, started the application. Now we can go to Postman. Here, let us try to get a person which is, first we'll test the happy path scenario. So perfectly working, 200, okay. Now I will give an ID which is not existing, invalid person ID exception. If I send, now this one, date, on this so and so date, 404, earlier internal server error 500 got. Now not found is the exception message, exception objects message. This is status code. This is HTTP status message, and this is person ID not found, the ID, and here also earlier 500 internal server error. This time it is 400. Now if you go to the console of the Tomcat, surprisingly there is no error because JRE did not handle the exception. Our own code handled the exception. Is this clear?